go ahead and get started with our office hours. We really appreciate you joining in for this week's office hours. I just wanted to go over the format for those who may be joining in for the first time. We have our weekly office hours for those who are based in the US and EMEA on Wednesdays from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time. And then monthly, we have our APAC office hours that are on the second Wednesday of every month from 4 to 5 p.m. If in between these sessions you do have questions or items that come up, please feel free to use GitHub discussions or GitHub issues. We go through and triage that daily to be able to go through and get your feedback, go through issues, and troubleshoot them as well. And so don't feel like you have to wait for an office hours in order to ask us questions. And then I'll put some links in chat. We also have recently migrated our Discord channel as well to a broader Azure AI community. But this is a really good place to learn from each other. We come through and triage, but it's primarily focused on customer learnings and feedback as well. And so with that, I'll go through a couple of updates from my end. There are new releases for Python and .NET. On the Python side, we have 1.28.0 out, and there is a lot of updates within this new release. We now have SK as an MCP server, and so I know we'd mentioned and gone through some demos last week in office hours. If you haven't had a chance to look at that recording, but we do have additional features out from MCP. There's also support for auto function invocation filters for Azure AI agents and Open AI assistants as well. And then there are some other new features from using GitHub with MCP server and Azure AI agents, and then also allowing kernel functions from prompts for both images and audio content as well. And so there's some other enhancements and improvements and bug fixes, but a pretty comprehensive release if you haven't had a chance to take a look. And then we also have a new .NET release out for 1.46.0. There are a lot of changes that are within this new release. And actually, Mark, I see that you're on. Is there anything in particular that you want to highlight to the audience?
Yeah. Hey, Sophia. Yeah, there's a lot of MCP related updates that have gone in. So yeah, that's one of the main things. Um, there's going to be an update coming soon to the vector store abstractions. Like, so we're working on the final pre-release at the moment. Like, so hopefully that'll go out in the next week or two. And that is the release candidate. Like, so we should be just about feature complete with that. Um, but yeah, it's mostly kind of like MCP stuff actually on the .NET side that's gone in.
Perfect, thank you. So if you haven't had a chance to look through our recording from last week, we have a lot of MCP demos that we go through and highlight as well. And so that's a great place to get started with for both .NET and Python for MCP and learn more as well. And then as Mark had mentioned, in the coming weeks, we'll have some updates around Vector Store for you as well. With that, I'll go ahead and go on to just a couple of blog posts. There are a number of guest blogs that we've been sharing out. And so for some of those, definitely take a look. The one that we're going to dive into actually further today is our part 2 within our internal Microsoft team and some work that they've been doing. And before we get to that, I did want to highlight we have a new blog post out for our Neon connector for serverless Postgres. And so this walks through in detail how to get up and running, deployed. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at this new connector blog post, I've linked in chat to our blog. This is a great place to look at. But with that, it looks like we have Samir on, and I'm going to actually turn it over to him to dive in further to our guest blog. Samir, over to you.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me? Hi, Sophia.
Yeah, perfect. We can hear you. I'll go ahead and advance the slides unless you want to share screen.
Yes, and then just 1 second. Sorry, I was just jumping from another call, so just give me a second, and now it's all set. All right, let me know if you see my screen.
Perfect. I can see now. Can others see it as well?
Yep.
Perfect. I see some thumbs up. Great. Over to you, Samir.
Perfect. Right. So hello, everyone. Today, what we're going to present is the natural language to SQL solution that we built using Semantic Kernel. I think let me start off. Why do we need NL to SQL in the first place, right? Why is this solution built? If you think of any big sized company or even medium sized company, they all have databases they work with. And the only way to access the data inside these databases, as most of the people know, is through SQL queries. Now, the problem is what you need to do to provide those SQL queries is usually either a SQL developer or a data analyst who sits down and designs the SQL statements, writes them, tests them, and this is how the rest of the people or the employees in the company, they can access this data in the database, right? So we wanted a way to democratize the access, especially if you think of let's say the chatbot scenario where the chatbot needs to pull data from the SQL database. How is the connection doing? Especially that in a chatbot scenario, you don't know what the question is, so you cannot pre-design and pre-write the SQL queries, and then connect it to the chatbot and hope for the best. So this covers the why. Why are we doing this? Now, we've implemented this NL to SQL solution using Semantic Kernel's process framework because it fits very well the scenario of a state machine, and this is what we wanted to do. So this is what we ended up doing as a process framework or as a process solution in Semantic Kernel. By the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. This is meant to be more of an interactive session than anything else. So let me cover first this process, and then we can go through a little bit of the comments. So we start first with the user query, which is really the question in natural language, in English or any other language. What we do is then we start the process with the first step, which is called the table name step. In the table name step, what we do is we try to identify the relevant tables in a database. So imagine in an enterprise database, you have hundreds of tables. Let's say, I don't know, 200, 300 tables. If you include the schema of these hundreds of tables in one LLM token window, even if you're able to fit them in this token window, it would still be very expensive for you to do this. So what we've done is we try to identify only the tables because they are described each in a paragraph. And when we include them in the LLM token window, the output of the step is to identify only the relevant tables. So, for example, we get 5 to 10 out of the 200 in the database. The next step would be to identify the columns inside the relevant tables. So again, imagine if you have hundreds of tables, and in each table there are tens to hundreds of columns. You cannot fit the full schema of the database inside one LLM call. So what we try to do is, divide and conquer kind of strategy, is that only for the relevant tables, we try to identify the subset of columns related to that are included in those tables. So when we reach the third stage, which is the SQL generation step, we've already have reduced massively the number of tables and the number of columns as well. And this is what the SQL step or generation step will work with. It's with the subset of tables and columns. This is where the SQL statement, or let's say the first attempt of generating the SQL statement happens. What we do next is to validate this with business rules. So we try to validate if this statement is really fitting all the requirements from the company's perspective. Now, just to clarify the concept of a business rules validation, I just want to compare this with the validation step. So the validation step actually validates the SQL statement from a syntactic point of view, right? So the SQL syntax, if there's any problem with, for example, the join statement or the structure of the SQL statement, think about this as a code review, right? Now the business rules is a bit different because we're capturing the rules of the company or the organization that will affect the SQL generation step, which means if I want to give an example, one of the business rules could be if I want to get the total count of this product, you also need to get the total count of this bundle because this product is part of this bundle. Even though, in the table, it doesn't, in the table schema, it doesn't say so, but the business rules can actually dictate something like this. So it's more of a, external business knowledge that is captured in this step. And then we proceed to the validation step, which is, it just validates the structure of the SQL. And then we go to the last step, which is it executes this the SQL statement and gets the results, which is then, put in a final LLM call just to give us human readable answer, right? Now, the exact sequence of the step, the way that you see them here, this is what we ended up designing and actually validating against one of our clients' databases, and it works well. Now, what we're trying to do is to reorganize these steps for different scenarios. So change a little bit of the configuration. For example, moving the business rule steps before the SQL generation, just to inform the SQL generation step of better business rules, for example. And these things, these are valid experiments, and they perform a little bit differently on different evaluation data sets. Any question at this point? Is it clear, or anyone has a comment or a question?
I'm just looking through chat. Looks like there's a question not related to this that we'll get to in a bit, but would love to hear from folks. So feel free to put any questions you have in chat, or we'd love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute as well. As Samir mentioned, we want this to be very interactive and be able to have that discussion back and forth. So I would love to hear from folks of any thoughts or questions.
Yeah. So so going back, so this is the state machine of the whole process. Now, this fits very nicely with what Semantic Kernel has done, right? With what they offer as the process framework. Because if you think about it, the process framework is a process with a series of steps, just like this one. And then transitioning from one step to the other in the process is based on events, which is, again, fits exactly what we wanted to do here. And then eventually reorganizing all these steps into different order or different relationships is also super easy in doing in the process framework, right? Because you can just define new relationships or reorganize the order of things. You already have the steps defined and the logic within them defined. Just a few lines of code.
And then
So
Samir, I'm seeing a couple of questions too when you want to pause for that too. I'm just seeing a couple that are coming in.
Sure. So Sophia, I'm not seeing this question. Would you like to read them, or we
Yeah,
address them
definitely. So
later?
there was a hand up from Alexandria. Would love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute. Any questions that you have?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. This looks great. I was wondering if there's been any consideration to sort of have a semantic dictionary or integrate with a semantic layer to translate the user query into, what it actually means. If someone is asking about a metric, to understand what the metric actually means in the context of the business unit or something like that, to then get to the right tables. Integrating with metadata layer, it could be Purview or something else. So, because this is something that we see as being sort of essential for complex use cases.
Yeah, that's a great consideration. So the way that we've seen it working here, so that's actually great consideration. we can probably, think about integrating this here. The way that we've seen this work here is that when we submit the query and the table names tab and the column names tab, they have the let's say the full schemas of the or let's say the description of all the tables and then the full schemas of these tables. We rely on them to know that for this query, these are the valid, so these translate into these tables and these columns, right? And this seems to be working well, actually, right? One thing that I forgot to mention in this scenario for this client, what we've done is that we try to summarize the function of each table in one paragraph, and then eventually all of them, they fit into one LLM call. But you can also change this to be actually a rack call, right? So like a rack system, which you reach out to AI search and you retrieve the top 10 or top 20 tables, right? Does this answer the question, or?
Yeah, it's all of that, but it's also about like the definition of a metric, right? So there could be a question about asking for what does sales mean, and then it's like, okay, what is the meaning of that for that business unit? This is not directly related to, I guess it's part of the table definition, maybe. Yeah, so I guess it's related. Yeah, I was curious to see how you handle that, and I see where you're going with, right? That makes sense on tables, but I think it's also about business meaning of kind of translating the business jargon of the user asking the question into okay, which part of the schema, which table, what is the definition of the metric, and then feed that into the context of the prompt. Yeah,
it's a very that's a very interesting concept. I think the responsibility that you're describing was split between these three steps. So even the business rules, we saw that there are a few, iteration going on between the SQL step and the business rules, because the business rules was looking at the SQL query and the SQL statement and saying, this does not fit because for this quantity, you need to include another quantity with it. So I think the responsibility was split, but I think your approach makes more sense because it would be a cleaner way to do this. At least at this step.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thank you. I'd love to understand more about the business rule, but I'm guessing you have a repo or something we could look at later on too.
So I think it's gonna be in the blog article
that
hopefully Sophia will be publishing. So the link will be there. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll have a look. Thank you.
Sure.
Perfect. And then there was a question in chat about the repo, so perfect. There's one other question that Rajesh had is the solution tailored for a specific database for SQL, Postgres? It looked like Daniel, you would answer that, but just wanted to see if either of you wanted to add anything for our recording too for this question.
So we did provide in the repo a SQLite database just for demo purposes. But then the prompts should be so in the prompt they should be slightly changed because it should explicitly say in each prompt which SQL dialect we need to generate the response for or the SQL for, and that's pretty much it. So okay. So even the execution step needs to be tailored to the exact connection of this database, right? So we haven't yet, for example, used SQL Alchemy or any of those. We try to make it more native connection, at least for the SQL Server and SQLite, right? But then the rest of it is almost all of it could be used as it is for the different types of databases.
Perfect. And then just one final question I'm seeing in chat is, do you give a certificate of this session when you're performing this or not?
I don't know. Is this something that usually gives, Sophia, to people?
Rama, do you mind coming off of mute specifically of what you're looking for from the sample? I'd love to hear from you. If not, we can follow up in chat if you want to put it in chat. I see Peter, you have your hand up. Would love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Samuel, this is great. I've been working actually text to SQL kind of a scenario. So I using the LangChain, the library as well. But just question before comment on this. So basically, you are just structure the schema, table name and definition and attribute, the column name attribute. That's all you did, right? That's kind of basic foundation data,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
So yeah, exactly. So at the start of this customer engagement, I think they did try before, before we came in, they did try the LangChain SQL
Right.
connector. I'm not sure
Right.
what's the exact name is. They did try it. For them, it was a mess. It was a kind of a black box. They didn't know what the multiple calls in the background did. They needed something that is much more controllable for
Right.
them.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I had this exact same experience. First my approach was using the LangChain, the library that, it's kind of black box. What's that? But it's like maybe 70% maybe working, sometimes doesn't work. So what I just want to share with my thoughts, what I'm doing actually. So I was kind of building that structure, table, but not only for table and attribute, also because LLM sometimes it confuses. If you let's say you have a key attribute in multiple table, then LLM got confused which one attribute, which table they have to use it. So I think maybe getting into 70-80% is maybe feasible, but when you try to really getting perfect, almost 90% of time. So what I'm working on is you create some sort of a prompt message sample and then try to find out what the intents are based on the sample. And then
Yeah.
kind of train the LLM, hey, if you see this kind of question, then this is intention. So you got the intention for that one. And then the next step, what I did it is you created some of the prompt as well. And then you need to extract the right entity from the prompt. So second step is I'm kind of train them as what kind of entity based on the prompt, you have to extract certain format because the SQL statement depends on what the SQL statement, the date format, the time, it's all different. So somehow that you have to train that. And third step that I was working on is kind of mapping exercise to table. So if you see this intent, you retrieve from the first step, then using that intent and then apply which table that you have to use. So you kind of
Right.
breaking down and train the LLM. So when prompts comes in and then analyze with 3 steps and then find out so I think I'm getting much, much better result. If that
That's
makes
good to
sense.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. So especially for okay, so let me tell you what happened, at least with us, because I think I can relate to a couple of your problems. We had at the very start, we had this step, which is the same, right? So table name and column name are the same. And for some of the use cases, we actually had exactly what you described, which is columns in other databases that are relevant, but they're not really relevant because the table is not relevant, but the column description makes it look like it's relevant to the query.
The other thing
So this is why we.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the other
sorry.
thing, sorry to cut you off. The other thing that I did it is because initially I start with the CSV kind of separated by the colon, and then I switched to JSON format. It seems like a JSON format they're preferred. The LLM is more preferred. And then from the
Yeah.
JSON format, I was kind of defined, hey, here's a primary key for this table, and then here's a foreign key kind of relationship. So you provide that additional information. So how these relations, kind of an ERD diagram, right? Based on the JSON.
Yeah.
So I think that will also provide a little bit better performance as well too. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's a good feedback. We are doing something like this here, but not like in JSON or ERD format. So here we're providing a one paragraph description of each table, and we force this description to also have the description of the keys and the foreign keys. So we're hoping that the LLM will actually try to match the foreign keys with the other tables, but probably an ERD representation probably will make this better, more reliable. So I agree with you. So yeah, thank you for the comments.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I've been working on actually.
Yeah.
It's a lot of thing. I mean, again, you can get the 70% it's working, but when you try to get the rest of the percent, 20, 30%, it's very hard
Yeah,
that, you know,
it's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and fully agreed. I think in the next slide or so, you know, just to manage expectation, this does not work 100% of the time. Definitely not, right?
right.
And I think I have it in one of the next slides. What we've seen is that it's definitely much better than the one-shot mega prompt kind of approach, where you
yeah,
put
absolutely.
everything in one prompt, and
Right.
this works much better. But to say that this reaches, for example, 80, 90, 100%, no, definitely not, especially for complicated databases. Now, if you have a small database like 15 tables or 20 tables, something like this is pretty good. Most of the time, it gets it right. And we're talking, you know, over 90% or something like this. Maybe, you know, let's say 10 tables with straightforward schema, right? But for complex ones, I don't know, we haven't yet benchmarked it. We are actually working on benchmarking this.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you for the input.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm not seeing any others in chat. Anyone else want to come off mute before we go on?
Okay, so just covering this very quickly because, you know, we were just actually now just talking about this. So this performed really well on very simple databases, but the whole process approach is intended to be used for complex databases because it, you know, it performs better than the one-shot mega prompt. Now, one thing that we really found out that affected performance a lot is the clarity of the business rules. Because we had multiple attempts to write these business rules and to capture them in the system. And invariably, some of them actually look, at least to the LLM, they look contradictory. So what ended up happening is we did something in SQL generation. The business rule says, no, this fails. It goes back to SQL generation. It fixed it again. But now when it fixed it, you know, it screwed up something else. So we kept in this loop for a few times until, you know, it decides that, yeah, okay, fine, and just lets it go, right? So it's very important that these business rules are very clear and logically, you know, they're not contradictory, right? And again, so this is something that we touched upon. That is that for the table and columns steps, you could use AI search and RAG to retrieve them rather than putting all the description in one shot. And we're just working on benchmarking as mentioned earlier. We actually just finished building an evaluation set. So this eval set has three things in them: the questions in natural language, the SQL statements, and the ground truth, right? The next step, we are using the MS AdventureWorks sample database, you know, for testing to standardize on, because I mean, this is what we've done with the process framework. Is this is one approach, and then there's a couple of other two more approaches I think that we're benchmarking against, right? And even within this approach of process of semantic kernel process, you can always say, maybe if I take this message rule, you know, before the SQL generation, maybe this will perform better, right? So we needed a standard benchmark on which to run all the different approaches against and see what we get. And I think the last slide that I have is really, you know, a video of this. And this is running now. So just to, oh, sorry. Okay, so I think I need to. I'm not sure why it's not running. Okay, maybe I should come. Okay, I'll just run it this way. Hopefully it's not too small. Okay, now it's running. Okay, so the first query is an easy query. It should run it within 10-15 seconds. Okay, I'll just pause here. I'll just explain what this is. This is the UI that actually visualizes the SQL process. So you actually ask the query here. You just click on the submit. This is the process flow with the different steps in it. This pane is about the input data and the output data. So this is what's the input to the step and the output to the step. And this pane is about, or this area is about transition history. So you can see that, for example, the SQL generation step started here, and then there's a transition from the SQL generation step to the business rules step, right? And then started the next one, right? And then once you get the final answer, you will see the final answer in green, just under this area, right? So you will see it pop up. So the query was, find me the doctors who have treated more than 5 patients. This is the list of the doctors. Now, when I run this, the next query is an impossible query to answer, because what we asked the database for is something that the information is not there. So the column is not there, right? So we said that show me the high-risk patients with chronic conditions who are using wearable devices with low battery levels. Now, in this database, there is no column for battery levels, right? And you can see that this little bit, goes over the process a few times. And I think I've made the video shorter, but you can see that it goes back to the SQL generation step. And then eventually says, okay, I didn't find anything. I'm sorry, I cannot provide any information about this. So for the third query and the final one, it's a bit of a complex one because it requires a couple of joins. And again, I've shortened the video, but this takes probably around 30 seconds, so it's a bit of a long one. But I shortened it, and you can see that it will show the results here. So yeah, you can see the results coming up here. And just to show that this is a interactive UI, you can click on these transitions, and the inputs and outputs of every step should show here in the middle pane. And I think, Sophia, that's it for me. So if you wanna share back your screen, or if there are any questions, we can answer.
Perfect. Would love to hear. I saw that there were some questions in chat. Thank you, Daniel, for handling those. But just wanted to open it up to other questions that folks may have. Feel free to come off of mute on the demo, and thank you, team, for joining and going through it. I see we have a hand. Logan, would love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, so my question is on the agent-to-agent protocol, which is, from my understanding, fairly new from Google. But the idea is it seems to be something very similar to what MCP is trying to achieve, but from an agent-to-agent communication point of view. Does Semantic Kernel plan to support that at all or not?
Yeah, there's some support and items in the works. Let me see. Ben, do you want to dive in a bit further of what we're looking to support? Would love to dive into that.
Yeah, sure. This is for what again? Sorry.
A
For
to
A2A,
A,
right?
and so just wanting to see. I know that there is some work that we have planned, but didn't know what we're wanting to share publicly.
I think what we have done so far is that for the Python side of things, we have submitted a pull request to the A2A repository that shows a sample of how to integrate semantic kernel with A2A. And then once that gets merged into the repo, we will probably put out a blog post showing it and sort of pointing to it. And then I think we will be probably also adding the samples to our repo within the next, I don't know, couple weeks. That's the goal.
And then my second question for that would be C# support as well.
Mark, do you know what the plans are on the .NET side?
Yeah, so we're kind of waiting to, I mean, at the moment, as far as I know, there isn't say a client SDK or anything like that for A2A, right? So that's why the sample, we're contributing to that repository to start with. But we need to, like as soon as there's a client SDK, then we can start actually building a .NET version of it, modeled on whatever they've provided in Python. So we're kind of waiting. Yeah, all we can do is basically contribute to that repository to start with, and then we'll wait until things evolve a little bit further.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for the question. I see another great question in chat from Rasmus. Would love to hear about your SQL Server vector store connector questions that you have. And I see that Wesley and folks are on, so I'd love to dive into the questions that you have.
Cool. Yeah, so when you use the SQL Server vector store and you make your class, for example, with 3 data properties and a vector property, and then you create the collection, it works, of course. But if you then later want to add a 4th data property, another property like a string or something, right now the system will fail because it only creates the table. It will not modify the table behind the scenes. Is this on purpose, and how, if it is, how should we do our migrations based on that?
So yeah, we do not support any kind of update scenarios through the abstraction because most databases, most vector databases don't support this functionality. You can't just go and update easily. Also, the definitions that we have for create are not as fully featured as what you could have in a database itself. There's loads of different things you can do in every different database. What we have in our definitions is a significant subset or a small subset of all of the different capabilities from all of the different databases. So when you say update, it's hard for us to be able to tell, how do we merge, whatever's already on the server side with whatever might be new. Certainly, we don't want it to be lossy, for example. So yeah, ultimately, any kind of schema update scenario will have to be handled outside of the abstraction.
Yeah, that was sort of what I thought as well. And of course, I can just go in and update the table. But everything I do with my SQLs are done with Entity Framework. So I thought, okay, let's make Entity Framework do the migrations, and then, but then I end up with the property of the read-only memory of float that they don't support yet.
Yeah.
Do you know if they plan to do that, or are we just doomed not to use Entity Framework together with these vector store tables?
This is a good question. One of the folks who's working on Entity Framework is actually working with us on the vector store abstractions. What we can do is, maybe ask him the question and then get back to you, if that makes sense.
That would be fine, yeah.
Cool. I'll start a separate thread on that. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question. Thanks, Wesley. Other questions that folks may have, would love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute. Looking through chat, looks like a lot of them have been answered as well. So thank you everyone for that, but would love to hear from folks.
Yeah, I have a question. So every time then you do a query, does it go through this? Is there any learning of some of these complex queries so that the next time when a query comes that you don't have to go through this process all over again to see whether it's valid or not? Is there any learning based on let's say a complex, I do a little outer join, inner join, and I do this. And is there any way for the system to learn? Okay, now the next query comes, I don't have to redo this the whole thing, but I can construct the query.
So I'm assuming you're talking about the NL to SQL, right? The process?
Yeah.
No, there is no built-in learning. So every time it goes through the process.
Yeah. I think because if you look at a lot of other approaches, people are kind of either using a tuned model or they are putting a lot of few-shot examples with some complex queries so that when a query comes that it is able to easily interpret it. To me, to do this every time a new query comes, going through this entire cycle could be expensive, and it may be not as efficient.
Not sure I fully agree with this. You can still use a fine-tuned LLM with this approach, right? The whole idea of this is, I mean, even if you use a fine-tuned LLM, the fine-tuned LLM will not remember the entirety of your schema. That's something to keep in mind. So the fine-tuned LLM will actually improve your performance for SQL generation, but it's not realistic to assume that the fine-tuned LLM will actually understand and remember all of your tables, hundreds of tables with hundreds of columns, so the total will be thousands of columns. It will still need you will still need to use a strategy of how you break down this problem, and basically, okay, out of the hundreds of tables, I need to focus only on the ones that are relevant, and out of the thousands of columns, I need to focus on the 10 to 20 columns that are only relevant, and then you focus the attention of the fine-tuned LLM on this one. So again, but until LLMs they develop to the point of one fine-tuned LLM can actually remember the full schema. I'm not sure they are at this point yet.
And how, like, I know that we are using this, Microsoft was working on some of these models, particularly I know they're using it in Power BI for natural language query. Is there any connection, or do we work with them to see how they do this?
To be honest, personally, I have no idea what's been done on the Power BI. If anyone in the in this audience knows, I mean, feel free to speak up.
Great. Well, we'll go on to the next question. I'm seeing we have a couple of hands raised. Anish, do you want to come off mute? I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question which is regarding security. When we come up with these, we have this Azure Content Safety resource, which we can leverage for security. So I would also like to see if we set up samples, we also add some security measures into it, since this, if I can take this and apply somewhere else, I have to always be careful that whatever the user throwing is not harmful to my database and things like that. That's number one. Number two, I see that the Azure Content Safety security measures are currently designed in a way that you have to make multiple calls for prompt injection and content safety. So I'm not so sure if somebody from content safety is here in this call, but I would like to see they merged into one, so that folks doesn't have to make several calls and spend time before a user query gets to the model. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. This is a little bit out of scope of the Semantic Kernel team. I'm happy to take it back to our broader team, but just know that within Semantic Kernel, there is a lot of security features from dependency injection, other items that you can do as well, but happy to fall offline for the right form for this question with the content safety team. And then I'm just looking, looks like we have a couple other hands up. Alexandria, would love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is more to add up to the question from Raj earlier about learning, right? So it's more like an observation or something we've tried with a few use cases, right? Another way to learn from it, not necessary to fine-tune the model, but to kind of store the user query and the plan that was eventually executed successfully by the process and save that into vector store so that when you have another question coming through, you try to see, has that question or something similar been answered before, and what was the plan that was used, and just have that as extra context with the LLM so that it doesn't start from scratch, and they have some techniques that come out of it. So we've experimented with that with a couple of customers, and this is a easy way to kind of learn without, getting into fine tuning.
So Alex, what you've done is you've stored the queries and the answers. The problem is, how would you know for sure that this is a successful answer?
Not the answer, but yeah, you can take care of that as part of your UI, right? If you get the user to say, yeah, that's correct or not, then you only store
I
those.
see.
Yeah, but you don't store the answer, you store really the query that was generated, but you leverage user feedback to say, okay, that apparently was a good one, so I'm going to store that. But there are problems that come with it, right? Like if you have a schema change and things like that, you have to invalidate that cache and so on. So, but it could be effective for complex use cases to kind of speed it up quite a bit.
I see. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the question. I see another hand up. Chris, would love to hear from you if you want to come off of mute.
Yes, I've got a lot to ask, so I don't know if I can get it all. I'll try my best to make it simple here. Do we have any kind of example? I work on the Zebra AI team now, and we're doing integrations for AI for support in a bunch of organizations internally. And one of the things I'm going to be tasked with is trying to figure out how to build a back end. And I was using plugins with our API team, and I think I worked with Ben or a couple of people on here with that. And we used plugins and we used functions and a lot of descriptions. And it seemed like it seems like it's the same concept of agents, that the way we were using plugins. So my question is do you guys have any kind of sample real world that would show how to properly set up and utilize agents and plugins to build like an orchestration and a platform to where like somebody could go have a conversation and it could be about troubleshooting or fixing a problem with Azure, say API, APIM or app services or anything. And it basically, the platform takes the questions and knows what to involve to first diagnose and then possibly start resolving the issues.
Yeah, great question.
I know it's a lot. It's a lot, and I got a lot more to add to it, but I'm going to stop right there. And if not, I've been talking to Evan, I think, and I think I may put what our needs are and put it into the internal teams channel, if that's a better avenue. But I thought I'd start joining these office hours to start developing some relationships because we want
really
to like.
appreciate you joining.
Go ahead.
And for sure, feel free to utilize our internal teams channel, put questions there, but we definitely do have samples and areas that you can dive into that in particular. And so I'm happy to spend some time with you one-on-one as well outside of the office hours. And I can go through a couple of the samples there, but really appreciate you joining and just continue to ask questions here in the internal channel as well.
Well, the reason I say good examples is because one of the things I started out with, like with the playground and using it to build like automated web, it like being able to debug and follow and adjust what we need to was a big problem. And when that's kind of where we came out and wrote our own API and used plugins. And so if we start going to use agents in like Azure and creating them there, and do we lose functionality or ability to say like if we're building one to do RAG and you have a question and it goes out and we're having problems and we don't have the ability to set breakpoints or debug and see what the semantic ranking the ranking scores, or I think I may have that wrong, of what they're coming back, and we may need to adjust or put conditions on what's coming back and things like that. That's what I'm asking, because I don't want to keep going down a path to where we get into it and we start going to production and then we start running into problems that's not easily fixable or adjustable to where we can have our conversations be as accurate as we need them to. But I'll follow up with you. I'll put together some details and try to put some bullet items to make it hopefully make more sense, because I know it's a lot. I've been thinking about this for a year and a half and trying to get somebody else to understand it in 3 minutes is going to be difficult.
Yeah, happy to dive in further. And the kind of one solution as well as you've been talking to that comes to mind is our process framework. And I see that Ben
Yes.
is coming off of mute, and so that's one that I think could really fit in well to what you're
Mhm.
talking about as well. Ben, anything from your perspective to add to?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably a very good fit for process framework. So, I mean, yeah, if you could grab some time with me, or if you want to just, send a message to the internal Teams channel, that's fine. But yeah,
But,
I'd be
but
happy to
let me
help.
do that because I put it together into Evan because somebody, a Dan from an AI somewhere, I can't remember his last name, told me to get
Mm-hmm.
with him, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it. And I also have another thing because we got another part that uses prompt flow, and we're trying to migrate it over, and everybody's told us to get away from prompt flow, and they told us to use agents or get with semantic kernel, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I need to figure out how to all of it ties together because we'd like to have a platform because this all it is a we're using it for simulation for like our support or our sales. Like a sales team will go in there and they can describe the kind of customer, and then they can start doing a simulation of a call that they would have with sales, and it helps train them. So
Mm-hmm.
we kind of together to where we're not just doing one piece over here and one piece over here, and then it just gets way out of control. We want to try to get it to where we have an orchestration that ties everything together, and it makes it also as simple as possible to develop and add functionality to. So I'll try to top it up and put it there, and then yeah, I'll get with some of the PMs that I'm working with because they'll probably want to be in the conversation as well.
Yeah, definitely sounds great. I'd say maybe set up a meeting for us, 30
Okay.
minutes or so we can just go through it and look at
Yeah.
the whole picture.
I'll put it together so you'll have something to, you're just not getting having a fire hose turned on to you in 30 minutes.
All
So,
right. Sounds good.
all right. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Any other questions folks have? We have a couple more minutes left and would love to hear from you with questions you may have. If there aren't any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up our office hours this week. Thank you everyone for joining in. And I'll stay on in case there are any other questions that folks have or items you want to come off of mute with too.